And these are going to be the Frostlands and the Firelands editions. And if you're not familiar with the original game, this is a game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic world that has fallen into a nuclear winter. Each player is going to be running their own convoy of vehicles, racing against the other players while also being hunted by machines and enemy raiders. And of course, there's going to be other obstacles and the environment itself that the players are going to have to deal with. Each of these new versions are going to be introducing modular maps that you can piece together out of multiple boards, asymmetrical characters, as well as modular bonus actions to differentiate yourself even more from your opponents. But then there's also going to be a completely revised combat system and brand new loot mechanisms. Of these two new versions of the game, you can think of Frostlands more like a second addition to the original game because there will be an upgrade pack that allows you to upgrade your standard edition if you do already own it, and it's going to be playing more true to that original game, whereas Firelands you can think of more as a standalone expansion because it is going to be building on top of those rules, adding a few new complexities and additional layers if you are looking for a little bit more. Of course, there's also the thematic differences, and Frostlands takes place in a frozen wasteland depleted of its resources, and players are trying to reach a ship at the other side of the board in order to escape the frozen north. Firelands does take place in the same world, except for it takes place in a desert where there's a city that also has a piece of technology that allows them to separate the fog of the nuclear winter and allow the sun to shine through. But of course, this does bring in its own hazards that the players are going to have to deal with. And in this version of the game, players are not trying to reach a ship, but instead you're trying to outrun an electrostatic storm, either reaching that fortified city or finding shelter in a cave. Like I said, this is an expanded version of the game, so it's going to be adding a few different mechanisms like contaminated food, which provides stronger bonuses to the players but increases their contamination. It also features rock slides rather than avalanches, which can both block your paths, but the difference with the rock slides is that they can actually be crossed if you do have the right tools, but they can have varied effects when you do decide to cross them. And you're going to be flipping a token whenever you cross one of these locations in order to reveal what that effect is going to be. And then once done, any player can then also take that shortcut since you've cleared it, but they will also have to face that same repercussion of whichever token was there. The rocks aren't the only thing you have to worry about getting in your way though, because like I said, there is a fortified city here and they're going to be closing different gates along different paths in preparation for the upcoming storm. And if one of those gates closes before you're able to get there, you're going to have to find an alternative route. Luckily, another difference here is that there is dual endgame locations. You can either get to that city or you can get to the cave entrance in order to get these scoring bonuses and avoid any repercussions of being left in the storm. But of course, each of these are going to be offering their own distinct scoring criteria. This version also introduces a new type of survivor that's going to be using a fury point system in order to take actions. And this version also introduces flamethrowers, which brings in a whole different ammo type, and there are going to be more options with encounters and loot as you play throughout the game. And the way that these games play is over 6 rounds where players are going to be using their cards to take various actions. And in order to set up the main board, you're going to be taking 3 different terrain boards and putting them together to create that map. As part of the main board, there's also going to be an exploration zone that has 5 different locations where you're going to be drawing cards from the exploration deck at the start of the game and then assigning a card to each of those locations randomly. These cards remain there until they are used or removed for various reasons, and then you're just going to be replacing them with a new card from the deck. Like I mentioned, players are primarily taking their actions through their cards, but each player is also going to have this board in order to keep track of the current state of their cards, because the way that they work is that you're going to have a bunch of different survivor cards that can have different effects as well as a value associated with them, and that value represents how many points they're going to be giving you to spend on your various choices of actions. Players are going to be taking turns performing just one action at a time, but you have a few options that you can choose from. You can move your survivor cards from the active zone into the exhausted zone in order to spend their total amount of points to activate any of those exploration cards at the bottom of the main board. These normally allow you to do things like gather different resources, upgrade your convoy, or even gain new items or even additional survivor cards. But rather than moving a card to the exhausted zone, you could instead move it to the rest zone, and this will allow you to spend those points to repair your convoy rather than performing those exploration actions. The final action you have is to pass, but once you do that, you can no longer take any other actions. And then once all the players have chosen to pass, that's going to be triggering the end of the action phase, where any of your rested survivors are going to be moving back into the active zone, and then any of your exhausted survivors are going to be moving into the rest zone. So you can already see when you choose to exhaust survivors, you're going to have to wait 2 rounds before you get them back, whereas if you choose to get a rest action, you're going to be getting them back in the following round. I did mention food before, and if you do have any, you can actually use it for additional skill points or to recover some of your survivors early. Players will then all be able to move their convoys out on the main board, and the amount that you get to move is determined by your convoy's current speed, and players are going to be spending fuel as well as nitrous oxide in order to do this. And of course, there's all sorts of different routes that you can take, including shortcuts, but any of the locations that have any effects, you're going to be activating them as soon as you stop on those locations. At the end of this phase, players do also update their turn order based on their relative positioning out on the board. Players will then check if there's any enemy cards in the exploration zone beneath the main board, and if there are, they're going to get moved to the region where the leading convoy is located, and then the ambush effect of that enemy card is going to be resolved, dealing damage or applying negative effects to any of the players in that region. The players in that region can also fight back, taking turns attacking the enemies by using their weapons and ammo. Any enemies that are defeated this way are going to be granting loot proportionally to those that contributed to their damage, and then any surviving enemies are going to issue another attack, which is going to be determined by drawing an outcome card. The rounds continue like this, with players trying to reach one of those final destinations, and if you are able to do that, you're going to be gaining additional victory points for making it to the end, but players will also be gaining victory points from the different cards and items that they gained, and any other victory points from defeating enemies or completing other objectives. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified.